Welcome class, we're back in session. It's a really hot day today, hence the almost lack of clothes. In today's video, we are talking about everything I know about vegan and gluten-free cakes. I'm quite excited about this one because cakes are quite aesthetic and you can really make them your own and make them reflect you with some personalisation. That being said, once you've got a grip on the basics, which throughout this year I really feel like I made a lot of progress on, and the learning I've done on this topic has mainly just been through osmosis of watching or reading a lot of professional cake makers just make their cakes and see what techniques they're doing, subtle little things they're doing with their spatula, wrist movements, and slowly becoming more efficient at creating a more reliable, solid finished product. This year I had far more birthday cake orders than I have in the past, which was really great to be able to put those learnings into practice and motivate me to be better. And I finally feel like the cakes I can make aren't just generic, they actually have a bit of individual pizzazz to them, while also tasting very good. But then figuring out how to make a cake that's vegan and gluten-free, that is structurally sound, is a whole nother layer. So once again, imagine heaps of fails and frustration and tears and cakes eaten by the worms. However, I figured out what I'm really searching for, what things have not served me, and I think what I want to communicate to you, first and foremost, is that it's actually so much more simple than I think we make it out to be. The best vegan and gluten-free cake that I've had, or my personal favourite, is one from Nigella's latest book, Cook, Eat, Repeat, which just has a base of almond meal and polenta. And it's not a structurally sound cake. You couldn't make a layer cake out of it or really adapt the recipe in any way. It's super moist and the crumb is insanely good, but the flavour, it's just dripping in orange, moist sunshine, and it's incredible. And it's so simple to make. It's not a traditional recipe in any way. It has oil instead of butter and yogurt instead of eggs, and yet this beautiful finished product comes through. And in my experimentation of really convoluted recipes, most provided by Erin McKenna, from her various cookbooks which detail her recipes from her bakery in New York, baby cakes, I kind of just kept coming back to simple is better. And if you can get a few things right, which I will talk about, you actually can produce a very delicious cake and then customize it to make it a bit more special and less sad. I don't think vegan gluten-free baking is quite in the trendy territory yet, and aesthetically it's not really comparable, but hopefully it's getting there. Similarly to the bread episode, the mix of flours you use in vegan gluten-free baking is very important. Protein percentage is important to ensure it rises and to avoid like sinkage at the end. And while ingredients like almond meal and polenta are so good for a really good crumb, they're not structurally sound for making lighter stackable cakes, so like celebration cakes. So starches are what is necessary to sort of lighten that up and also create a crumb that holds together better and is sliceable and is less fragile. So apart from a few exceptions in which I have been using the copycat recipes for Bob's 1-to-1 flour and Bob's all-purpose baking flour, which is quite good, I have actually been using the cheapest, most readily available supermarket gluten-free flour blend, which has a very chalky texture. It's not my favourite. I don't think it tastes particularly good, but I do like to be able to use what is readily available, because what is the point of having success if really it's only available to the 0.01%, you know? But speaking of general takeaway tips that whichever way you're going about baking cakes, here are some things. First of all, you need to be really mindful of how many gums are in your baking. So it's really common to add xanthem gum. Either you add that a controlled amount or it's in the flour mix that you're using. And I'm doing a bit of both, sometimes using a gluten-free flour mix. My favourites being for cakes, the Well and Good baking one, not the FG Roberts. I find it's too heavy and they're better at the bread stuff. Yeah, and also like just the Woolworths generic baking mix. But be mindful in your recipe. If you're either adding xanthem gum or it's already in your flour mix, make sure you're not adding any in any other surprising hidden way, which will most likely be through the plant milk, because plant milks can have lots of fillers and binders in them to improve the creamy texture, which is great for any other situation. But when you're adding it to a batter, you can potentially be adding more gums, and the consequences of that is that your cake will look fine, but it'll probably have like a stodgy layer there at the top of the bottom and not even rise throughout. So go for a super simple ingredient. Probably won't taste that good, but like an organic-y, like 3-ingredient plant milk is just the best way to troubleshoot out of that. Or just reduce the xanthem gum. I think it's sort of approached as quite a magical ingredient, but honestly, I think less is more in the xanthem gum territory. So if you're thinking there's quite a lot in your recipe, don't be afraid to half it. Your crumb and texture and gumminess will thank you for it. Another thing with gums you might find in some recipes, like in the Lauren McGowan chocolate cake recipe, which I'll point you towards because it's sensational. You make a batter and then you're like, oh, this is a bit thick, but then you add hot water at the end. Nora Cooks does this as well, and that is to partly activate the gums, like pre-cooking. And with any sort of cake batter that's gluten-free and vegan, definitely important to not overmix, not because you don't want to develop gluten, but because the binders, you want them to do their thing in the oven, not with your spoon. And if you, I don't know, are doing it in two places, it will become more gummy than you probably want. So you can expend stress in lots of different areas with cakes. They're obviously very technical and there's nowhere really to hide, especially in a vanilla vegan gluten-free cake. That's why I was like over the mood, so bloody chuffed when I made a vegan vanilla gluten-free sponge for my chocolate lamingtons, which is in the calendar, because there's no wheat flour. Just a plain vanilla cake without eggs or butter can taste just really sad and unenjoyable, but that really made my year, because now I have like a white cake as well as a chocolate cake, which allow me to spin off in multiple flavour directions. Yes, it's a lamington sponge, but you can make it into a cake. And Lauren McGowan's chocolate cake recipe, which I will link all these various resources and things below, is my go-to vegan gluten-free chocolate cake. It just works really well. It's not as gummy as the Nora Cooks one. It's very light. Speaking of chocolate, I don't know if you've noticed this, but for some reason, probably because of the cocoa, a chocolate vegan gluten-free cake is miles easier than any other cake flavour. It must be a property thing of the ingredients, and the quite aquaphobic cocoa just does something to the texture. They're always super moist, always have a beautiful crumb. I think also because chocolate is such a familiar flavour, it doesn't reveal the fact that the cake's missing a lot of common ingredients and you really can't tell the difference. So I would start there before you get a bit more wild with your flavour combinations. But yes, since creating my vanilla sponge recipe and doing lots of research of different bakery cakes and other people's methods, I just thought I'd share with you sort of my approach to building up a complex, exciting celebration cake that isn't just like traditional Napolitana cake flavour options. It's more interesting, a more special cake eating experience. So the way I get more flavour into a cake, this is my process. I'll start with something and ask what the person wants in quite a traditional way. So maybe like chocolate or carrot cake, or do they like citrusy things like lemon or more nuts? And then I will start adding and building flavours into that cake by infusing the milk, usually a tea, so either Earl Grey, chai, or even mint, and let that seep before you add that to your wet ingredients to just like get a base of extra gooey, wonderful, fragrant usually flavour. Then I might add a herb, so if it's chocolate, maybe rosemary, if it's lemon, maybe thyme. Adding spices in there if you can, like cinnamon and nutmeg and chili, which don't have to overpower the cake at all, but just add a little finishing note to your experience. And adding different citrus, and then stirring in nuts or using them to create a surprise nut-like cream we might be doing in the middle of the cake. And then by doing that in the cake with the plant milk, adding some mix-ins to the batter, adding some punctuation to your icing, you build up a more complex layered experience that completely overrides, and it's like, wow, see ya in the distance, the fact that there's no wheat and doesn't have that sort of wheaty cake finishing palette. I hope you enjoy hearing a few more tips as I take you through the process. So the cake I'm using as a teaching tool and the recipe I'm sharing is this chai spice carrot cake with lemon cream cheese frosting, which I have been testing for a hot second, so she's perfect. As I'm alluding to, I'm infusing the milk that goes into this cake with a whole bunch of chai tea bags, bringing that to the boil and letting those steep for 10 minutes while I get on with the dry ingredients, giving them the occasional squidge. Then I'm using my Bob's Copycat flour that I've mixed up, along with some caster sugar, but you could use any sugar, both raising agents, baking powder and baking soda, 2 tablespoons of flax seeds, which is nice because you don't have to make up the egg, then some chai tea bag straight in there, along with some salt, And then spices, cinnamon, ginger, and allspice is what I've used. And the chai really just goes with a carrot cake. If you think there's spices in it already, yeah, chai just complements them and it elevates the whole experience. So that was me squidging out the lumps instead of sifting. You do you. There's Merlin getting the carrot knob. And then I put the grated carrot straight into the dry ingredients instead of putting it into the wet finished batter, just because I find you do less mixing of the batter overall this way, and it helps the carrot not to clump up. Yeah, and you don't want to overmix gluten-free batter to avoid gumminess. So yeah, oh my gosh, that looks so gross. It's like you just want to squeeze out as much of the tea goodness as possible. Oh, it's like masticating. Yuck. Okay. Then add your other wet ingredients. So that was a light flavored vegetable oil, apple puree, some vanilla. Give that a whisk, and then add that to the dry ingredients. You'll think, there isn't enough moisture here to make a proper batter, and you are right. That's why you can hear the kettle boiling in the background. So mix it till just combined, and then add half a cup of freshly boiled water, and without over mixing, incorporate this carefully, obviously, into the batter, and this just activates the gums and gets things going. But yeah, until just combined is perfect. Then put that into 2 lined tins. As you can see, they're not super high cakes, big cakes, tall cakes. You could double this recipe, but yeah, it is nice that they don't have a dome, so you don't have to do any sawing off of a thing and potentially wasting cake, although you should probably just eat it. Then to make the frosting while that's cooking, that's the zest of half a lemon. I don't know why I'm doing that with my finger. Then some vegan butter, vegan cream cheese, a little squeeze of lemon juice, and then mix that together, and then add 2 cups of icing sugar. My usual ratio is like half a cup of butter, or you can sub cream cheese into that. Okay, half a cup of moisture, fat, creaminess to 2 cups of icing sugar. Gets a really nice soft frosting. I find that I prefer a soft frosting than it's so hard because there's so much icing sugar type frosting. That's a bit unfun to eat. So that's my preferred ratio. Then I scored this cake, what is it, like a decorating turntable at an op shop, so definitely not crucial. I lucked out on that. But yes, this is me building the cake on maybe a disgusting plate, up to you. I really like it, and I just didn't want to waste a cake board since I would be eating this myself. So a little cake spatula really does go a long way in this. I used a bit to stick the cake to the bottom. That's like putting blue tack beneath your dip thing on a platter, so it just stays in place better. And then I guess you just learn how to do this via practice, and the amount of icing is just perfect for this cake. You might think there's not enough, but I find it's the perfect amount, and it gives you 1 centimeter thick of icing, maybe 3/4 of a centimeter, 1/3 of an inch icing between the layers and all the way around. And I find less is more with icing, for sure, but that's my personal taste that I've come to appreciate, and that's me just speckling it with calendula flowers. I just thought I'd do something simple. I quite like a simple cake finish, especially when it tastes this good and the proof is in the pudding. I generally make the cakes look a bit fancier if the flavour's a bit more simple. But as you can see, it has a beautiful, beautiful moist crumb. I'm super proud of this recipe, and it's on my website. Hooray! Yes, thank you for watching Honeybunches. Hope you got something out of it. Bye!